Hey guys, I'm Heidi Prieb. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. This month on this channel, we're going to be talking about maintaining personal integrity inside of our relationships. So, what that looks like is figuring out the balance between our own authenticity, our own wants, needs, desires, who we are as people, and what we need to do and how we need to show up in order to stay in close or even very intimate connection with the people that we care about in our lives. Now, if you were raised securely attached, those two things might not strike you at all as things that are at odds with each other. But if you did not grow up with that secure system in place, it's really likely that in some form or another, you struggle a lot with the tension between your own authenticity and your ability to keep connections strong and close. So, over the course of this month, we're going to talk about this from a lot of different angles and lenses. But today, I want to start by going right to the core of this and talk about what it looks like when we find our own authenticity or one of our own needs or wants or desires is in conflict with what somebody else wants. So, this could be as simple as having a different idea of how you want the night to go than someone that you're planning a date with. But it could also be as complex as something like the version of myself that I feel most comfortable and happy embodying is a version of myself that someone I'm really close to takes offense to, or doesn't like, or feels hurt by. So, what we're going to look at is how we can find the right balance between self expression and relational care, especially if we feel like some aspect of our self expression is going to hurt somebody that we care about. I want to start out by pointing out that there are generally two types of pain that we experience in relationships. And once again, this might feel totally obvious to you if you are more secure, and totally foreign to you if you don't. So, the first type of hurt that we tend to experience in close relationships is the pain of disappointment. So, of our expectations going unmet, or of plans getting canceled last minute, or of some aspect of what we were hoping would happen inside of the relationship ends up not happening. But then we also have the pain of feeling uncared for. So if our friends or our partners or our family members feel like we're just not that interested in how we're impacting them or how the things that we do affect them, there's going to be a direct relational impact of that. In most cases, it's pretty easy to stomach disappointment when we feel like we're cared about and supported through the disappointment. But again, if you grew up in a culture or in a family system where it wasn't common to talk about feelings, what often happens is that too much pressure gets put on the things that you do in a relationship. So if we're used to showing up for each other as our only means of really showing love, then if you need to cancel a plan, or if something that you want to do is in contrast with what someone else wants to do and you care about that person, it's probably going to create an extreme form of inner conflict. Because if you don't know how to reassure that person that you still care about them and love them and don't want to damage your relationship with them, it's going to feel like the only thing you can do is either put your own needs aside and show up for them in the way that you'd concretely planned, or disappoint them and have the relationship fall into disarray around that disappointment. Because in secure systems, that second type of care, the care that shows up and attends to the relational dynamic itself very overtly and explicitly, is the thing that shoulders the pain of the first type of disappointment, which happens all of the time in life. All of the time, plans change, needs come into conflict, and to be in a secure relationship means to be in a kind of ongoing negotiation about which needs get attended to when and by whom. So this is a skill that you absolutely need to develop if you want to have those healthier, more connected relationships down the line. But before we get there, we're going to look at what happens if you grew up with more of that enmeshed patterning, when you find yourself in conflict with what you need and what someone you care about needs or wants from you, and all of the stuff that kind of comes up relative to what might come up for a more secure leaning person. So let's start out in that moment where you realize that something you want or need or care about is in conflict with someone you love. Maybe you want space in the relationship, but the other person is really struggling, and you feel like it's not necessarily the right time for you to be pulling back and taking space, because maybe you feel like they really need you right now. Or maybe there's a commitment that you made or something you offered to do for someone that you need to back out of because your own circumstances have changed in a way that now make it really challenging for you to follow through on that plan. Maybe there's something that your partner really wants or needs from you that you just don't feel like you can give them authentically. So when these moments come up, these moments where our authenticity is in conflict with some part of our connection to someone else, what often happens when we're insecurely attached or when we don't have the relational skills to navigate this is we immediately become dysregulated. So all of this kind of fear or panic or anger rushes into the system because we believe that having a need that differs from the need of someone we love means that either there is something wrong with us, or that we should be ashamed of having our own needs and feelings, or that in any case, we're now in a situation where somebody needs to get hurt. Which might be true, but what we're going to talk about as we go through this is how we can contain that hurt to that first type of pain, the pain of disappointment, without coupling it with type 2, which is the pain of feeling uncared about. So very often when we're in a dysregulated state, our thinking gets very neurotic. So our thinking starts to narrow, and it feels like we have less options than we have in reality. So in this case, if we have that enmeshed patterning, our thinking might kind of zero in on one of two options. Either I need to abandon myself and my own needs in order to keep this relationship strong, or I need to tend to my own needs in a way that is completely selfish, which means that I'm abandoning the other person. So we start seeing relationships when we're in this dysregulated state as zero-sum games. And a zero-sum game is one where one player's gain is always the other player's loss. So a very basic example would be a game where you have $10 and you have to split it between yourself and the other player, and there's no way to make more money. So essentially, every time one player takes $1, the other person loses a potential dollar. There's a finite amount of resource being played with. When we're thinking of relationships as zero-sum games, we're thinking of relationships as places where only one person's needs can be satisfied at a time if the needs conflict with each other. The problem is that neither of these options that we see when we're in this dysregulated state are either true or lead somewhere positive. Because what usually happens is when we go down that route of self-abandoning and of putting our own needs aside and catering to what somebody else wants or needs, or when we decide to suppress ourselves in situations where it feels like the person that we are with the thoughts and feelings that we have is not wanted or welcomed by the other person. This very often leads to resentment and scorekeeping down the line. So we start thinking to ourselves, well, I'm suppressing myself in this way for you, or I'm giving you what you want at the expense of what I want, which means in the future, you owe me, or there's some form of resentment that's getting built in me towards you. And so I think that for a lot of people, a trap they fall into when they want to stop people-pleasing, if they've identified that they are doing too much of acquiescing to other people's desires and they want to start living from their own desires, is that they're still looking at relationships as a zero-sum game, and they're still stuck in this kind of neurotic thought pattern. So instead of self-abandoning, they might go, okay, it's time for me to start doing what I want, and I don't care what anybody else thinks. And then we're going down that other route of prioritizing the self, but abandoning other people and not approaching the relationship with care when our self-expression has a negative impact on somebody. So when we start going down this route and we give ourselves permission to disappoint people, to prioritize ourselves, to set boundaries, all of which are completely and totally normal parts of secure relating. So there's nothing wrong with that. But we don't combine it with a deep care for the impact that our actions are having on the other person that we're in relationship with. What often happens is we end up hurting people in more ways than one. So we're causing them not just the pain of disappointment, but also the pain of not necessarily explaining to them in an embodied and secure way why we're doing all of this, or not helping them understand why the relationship is suddenly changing, and not being present with them as we talk through the impact that our new way of being has on them, and finding ways to find a middle ground. So often what happens if we go into this response pattern with kind of guns blazing and this attitude of I'm just going to do what's right for me and I don't have to answer to anybody else about it, is that inevitably we end up really hurting people. Because all of a sudden these connection points that we used to have with them, we're abandoning left, right, and center. And they might assume that that means we don't care about them anymore. And so often what happens when we notice that pain that we're causing other people is we become further dysregulated. So now maybe shame comes back online, or guilt, or we start second-guessing ourselves, or fear that we're going to lose the relationship. And this can lead to a different range of response patterns. Maybe we freeze and withdraw because we don't know what to do when someone gets upset with us. And I think that in a lot of cases, this is where ghosting comes from. When we just don't know how to respond to the impact that we've had on someone, and we go into kind of a shutdown state, it can be really hard to bring ourselves out of that, face the shame or the fear or whatever it is that we have around conflict, and enter back into the relationship. So this can actually be an exit point from the relationship that we didn't want or intend, when we just don't know how to deal with the impact that our self-prioritizing has on the people around us. Another thing that's pretty common is we ourselves might get very dysregulated by the idea that someone else is upset with us. And so we might take some action that causes that first type of pain, the pain of disappointing somebody else, because maybe we're canceling on a plan that we made with them, or maybe we're expressing ourselves in a way that they're uncomfortable with, and we're not really talking through the impact of it with them. And if we can't self-regulate around the feelings that come up for us when we've hurt someone else, another route we might go is trying to get them to regulate us around the fact that we hurt their feelings. So either explicitly or implicitly trying to get them to soothe us and tell us it's okay that we hurt their feelings, maybe by acting more and more vulnerable and dysregulated ourselves. And now we're causing, once again, two types of relational pain: the pain of disappointment and the pain of the other person having to take the adult role and do the relational repair when they were the one that was hurt. So if we try going to the other person and, let's say, crying and going, "I didn't want to let you down, but here's what's going on for me," and implicitly asking them to regulate us around the disappointment that we've caused them, if that doesn't go well, we might split into the third response pattern, which is villainizing the other person. And this is something that I think is actually pretty common, but that we don't often look at, because if we have too much shame to stay present with the pain that we cause the people in our lives, one way to get rid of that shame is to tell ourselves a story about how the other person deserved it. They deserve to be treated that way. Or if they have a problem with me doing what's right for me, then they deserve to not hear from me anymore. This type of thinking temporarily soothes the shame that comes up when we can see that we've disappointed someone or let them down. But it also tends to end relationships permanently. Because as soon as we're putting the other person in that bad guy position inside our own minds, because we don't want to stay present and associated to the fact that we have a responsibility to stay on the page with people when we cause them pain, intentionally or unintentionally, then there's essentially no hope for relational repair to ever happen. Because at that point, we're working with a false model of reality that isn't going to get us anywhere. And so now what we're going to do is kind of rewind the tape and go back to that moment where we realize that our needs or our wants or our authenticity is at odds with the needs or wants or authenticity of somebody else. And we're going to look at what it would look like to approach this through a secure lens. So through that framing of I'm okay, you're okay. Instead of thinking of relationships as this kind of zero-sum game where everybody's needs are in conflict with each other, we're going to talk about opening this up a little bit and exploring what it might be like to play a positive-sum game. So positive-sum game is one where resources are actually able to be increased through collaboration. So it's kind of like saying, here's $10. If you work together to invest it well, you could both end up with $10. And that's how we want to start looking at our relationships. If I have a need and my partner has a need, or my friend has a need, or my parent has a need, and they seem like opposites on the surface, how can we think creatively to get to a place where not only does everybody feel like their needs are reasonably satisfied, but everybody also feels like they're cared about and like the relationship has a solid foundation to it? So the first thing that tends to be different right off the bat when we're looking at secure attachment is that in those moments where their needs are in conflict with someone else's, secure people tend not to get dysregulated because they have that inherent worldview of I'm okay. There's nothing wrong with the fact that I have needs or that I have wants or that I am a different person than the people around me and I want to express myself in different ways. And they see it only as a logistical problem. So it's not that one of us has to be morally wrong for having the need and the other person has to be morally right, and we have to figure out who's wrong and who's right to solve this. Instead of that, there's this deep knowing that it's okay that I have needs. That's completely normal and part of life. And actually, it's really important for the people around me, especially the people I'm in close relationship with, for me to make sure that my needs are met. Because otherwise, I'm going to be all dysregulated and it's going to show up in my relationships. So it's really important for me to tend to my needs. And I recognize that other people have needs too. And just because they have a need or a desire or a form of self-expression that differs from mine doesn't mean that they are bad or wrong. It's also totally normal and okay that they have needs. So what we're looking at here is not a problem of figuring out who's the bad person and who's the good person. It's just a matter of looking at how do we get everybody's needs met as simply as possible. And if that's not possible, how do we make sure that the relationship survives a situation where maybe I have to behave in my own best interests in a way that hurts somebody else? So where that insecure patterning might automatically go to, am I going to abandon myself or abandon the other? The secure patterning automatically goes to thinking creatively around how do I care for myself and care for the other. And what this generally looks like is if that first type of pain comes up. So if you recognize I have to let someone down here, or I have to set a boundary for myself that I know the other person is going to struggle with. What we want to do is really hone in on that second type of hurt and make sure that as much as possible, we are avoiding it. We want to make the other person feel cared for and like we are willing to stay on the page with them and hear them out and listen to them as they share the impact that this thing is having on them. And let them know that even though we can't necessarily give them the thing they want concretely, we can still care about the relationship and about the impact that our actions are having. And for a lot of us, especially those of us who grew up with more enmeshed patterning, this is a very high-level skill to adopt because it might mean working through a lot of old patterning we have around what type of person we believe it makes us if we are ever to set a boundary or disappoint someone. So if we have any type of belief that disappointing people makes us a bad person, it's going to come out really strong. And we're actually going to have to make sure that we're able to check ourselves on that. Because otherwise, we're going to be flipping back into that old patterning of either needing comfort from the other person, or freezing and getting really weird around the whole situation, or villainizing the other person so we don't have to see ourselves as the villain. So we might find that most of the work we need to do around this skill is actually learning to tolerate people being upset with us. Learning to tolerate seeing ourselves as the kind of person who could disappoint someone else. Because in secure relationships, there are tons of tiny disappointments that happen all of the time. It's just part of being in honest relationship with other people. Communication challenges happen, mismatched expectations happen, life gets in the way, and sometimes we can't always do the things that we really hoped we could do for someone. And learning to handle those situations with grace and with care for both ourselves and the other person is a humongous part of what it means to become securely attached. To uncouple the ideas that disappointing someone means I am a bad person. Another thing that might come up in this process is you might learn that you really struggle to stand behind your own decisions. So when we start acting in our own best interests and other people start reacting negatively to that, it requires a lot of character strength for us to say, you know what, I know that this is right for me, and to be able to communicate that to other people in a way that is firm but kind. And again, kindness is the important part here. But if we feel like anytime we act in our own best interests and someone questions us or gets angry with us or pushes back at us, we immediately start to doubt ourselves to the point where we have no idea whether our decision was a good one or a bad one. That's another area we might just find we need to do some work in. Learning to get aligned with how to tell in our bodies when we are making a decision that feels right versus one that feels wrong for us. And on the flip side of this, something you might struggle with if you err more avoidant. You might feel way more comfortable just kind of backing off or dissociating a little bit from the situation if you feel like you need to disappoint someone. because you probably internally cringe at telling other people what's going on for you that makes it a challenge for you to show up in the ways that they need you to. And you might not even be super aware of that yourself, right? So the work that might need to get done there is sensitizing yourself to the needs and the fears and the challenges that come up for you that tend to put you in that freeze or withdraw response, and learning to bring those things into relationships and take them seriously so that your partners or friends or family members can also learn to see you as a person who has their own challenges, which is probably not the image you tend to give off most of the time because you're unconsciously and systematically shutting down your own vulnerabilities. Now, in terms of actual process, what we want to be looking at when we need to disappoint somebody. So when we're in some situation where our needs are in conflict with someone else's, and we go, you know what? Now is the time to tend to my needs. For whatever reason, this is what's really important and feels right now. But I want to also make sure that the relationship stays strong alongside it. So step one is being very transparent with the other person around what's going on for you. And again, what we're doing here is not trying to get the other person to regulate us or soothe us. It's simply to lay out on the table everything that's going on so that they know what they're working with. We are not letting them down or backing off or disappointing them for no reason. We're being clear and communicative about what it is that we're struggling with and why it feels like it's in conflict with whatever it is that they need or want from us. That might sound like, hey, I know I made this commitment and I feel really terribly about backing out of it. And I've been really struggling with my mental health lately. And I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed, and I'm wondering if we could have a conversation around how to make sure that this thing I've committed to that I now need to back out of doesn't leave you too high or dry. Maybe there's something you could actually do that would smooth over the situation practically in a way that you wouldn't be able to come up with on your own, right? So it takes going to that other person and kind of laying everything out on the table and figuring out where you might be able to creatively problem solve to get to those solutions that you might not be able to think of on your own. This could be as simple as, hey, I really need some space from this relationship, but I know that might impact you because we're really close, and as of right now, we spend a lot of our time together. Can we talk about how me tending to that need is probably going to impact you and how we can make sure that the relationship doesn't suffer too much because of this? And as soon as we're having conversations like that, we're now tending to that second type of pain, right? The pain of not feeling cared about. People are often very willing to understand changes and boundaries if they feel like they're being deeply respected and cared about through the process of those things being set. So this leads us to the second thing we want to keep in mind as we're doing this work, which is that we want to make sure we are overtly expressing the care that we have for that person and for the relationship. So letting them know, here's what I need to do for me, but I'm not abandoning you as a person in the process. I know that the actions I take are probably going to have an effect on you, and I care about that. And I'm going to be here to process it with you emotionally, even if I can't do the thing that I once thought I was going to be able to do for you. And a big part of this is learning to really empathize with the person who you are hurting. And this is actually, again, a pretty high-level skill if you come from an insecurely attached background, where you might have these shame beliefs that to hurt somebody else means I am a monster. And so we want to do that work of getting into that secure, I'm okay, you're okay mindset, where we can hold strong in the belief that we are good, caring, and okay people, even when we're letting somebody down. And when we can hold strong in that belief, it allows us to access actual empathy. So what actual empathy doesn't sound like is this kind of stilted therapy speak, right? Where we're going, I need to set a boundary, and I am hoping that you will understand my decision because this is what's important for me. What it means is finding the place inside of ourselves where we can access genuine, authentic kindness. And we can put ourselves in the shoes of the person that we're disappointing and really ask ourselves the question, what do I think that is like for them? And how can I make sure that I'm still showing up for them in a way that makes them know I care? What would I really need in that situation? What pain might I be in? And how might somebody be able to soothe that pain for me even while holding their own boundary around this thing that I'm disappointed around. So again, this is about working through the shame and guilt that comes up for us so that we can access actual, embodied, real-time empathy for the people that we are letting down, which is going to make the fourth and final step of this process a million times easier, which is the process of relational repair. So if we have actually hurt somebody, if we have disappointed someone in a way that is very significant, there's likely repair work that needs to get done in that relationship. So we have to think to ourselves, how has this impacted the other person, and what might I be able to do to make it up to them on either a practical level or an emotional level, or in a lot of cases, both. So if I've backed out of something last minute, can I help them find an alternate solution? And if not, can I look at what it might look like in the future for me to rebuild trust with this person? Maybe that means getting honest with yourself if you tend to overcommit to things and figuring out how to stop that process so that you can authentically go back to that person and have a plan for rebuilding your trust with them going forward. Maybe it means getting real with yourself about the fact that other people tend to not know what's going on for you. And so they can be really hurt when you let them down because you aren't upfront with them about how much you're dealing with or struggling with. And so the repair has to be around bringing more of that into the relationship in the future so they have more context as to why they're being let down, and they aren't taking it personally because they have no other explanation. So whatever it is that it feels like you need to bring more of into the relationship in order for the other person to feel like they're cared for, and that second type of pain is not happening even when the first type of pain has to. This is the work of relational repair. And it's going to look unique to every situation, but here's the thing. This process, on a small level, happens all of the time in secure relationships. It is part of what makes a relationship secure, is that people feel like they can be honest and open about the areas where their needs or their self-expression are in conflict with each other. And they can find ways to care about both themselves and the other person simultaneously, so that when they need to disappoint each other, or even when there's no way to avoid hurting each other, they still feel respected by each other. And they still feel like the relationship itself has a strong foundation that can absorb things like hurt and disappointment and mismatched expectations. Relationships are at their strongest when they're able to withstand a lot of these type 1 pains. And the more that they're discussed and put out in the open, the more you figure out together how to avoid this in the future. Because if you're aware of what's going on for yourself and what's going on for the other person with increasingly greater context and nuance, it means you're not only better at anticipating where your needs might soon come into conflict, you're also better at collectively figuring out creative solutions to your problems because you are playing that positive sum game with flexibility and creative thinking. And once again, the reason why secure relationships involve so many need negotiations like this are because both people understand that it's actually kind of their social responsibility to keep themselves feeling regulated and resourced. Because when we are constantly self-abandoning, it means we're depleting the resource that we have to show up for other people in an authentic way. And over time, that really depletes our stamina and can lead to things like depression or anxiety or other challenges that make it really hard for us to show up for ourselves and other people. So setting those boundaries, being clear with what we need, and making sure that we are prioritizing our own well-being well, caring for the people around us and the impact that we have on those people, is preventative relational work. We're preventing these burnout points that could come up down the line if we're not attending to these things in the moment, even when it's uncomfortable to do so. All right, I think I'm going to leave it at that for today. As always, let me know in the comments any questions you guys have as you go through this, any thoughts that are popping up. I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you back here again really soon.